What's up, everyone, and welcome to the second episode of Single Player Campaign. I'm your host, Patrick. This episode's coming out a little later than I had hoped, 2 weeks instead of one, but I've got a couple of fun items I want to talk about today. It's going to be a shorter episode than the last time, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. Um, but the first thing I want to talk about is the fiasco of sorts that happened with Xbox yesterday. For anyone who pays attention to Microsoft and Xbox and isn't mostly a PlayStation gamer like me at the moment, they made an announcement that they were going to be shifting Xbox Live prices from $60 a year to $120 a year. And not so surprisingly, that was immediately met with backlash from everyone. And I'm not entirely sure how they thought this was going to go, because hours later, they immediately reversed their decision and switched the price back on top of making a change for free to play games, which originally required Xbox Live Gold. So you had to pay the $60 a year to play the free to play games. They reverted that. So now people can download the free to play games and play them for free. And it's the strangest thing because of how quickly everything happened. It's If I was being truly cynical, it almost seems deliberate, some sort of marketing ploy. Maybe there was some pressure from outside sources to reduce the $60 price, and by pretending to bump it up to twice as much, they knew they would get a ton of backlash, and then people would be happy that they would immediately respond and announce that, oh, just kidding, we're going to keep the price at $60. Uh, and everyone rejoices that they get to keep paying the same amount of money that they've been paying this entire time. And I doubt that's the actual reason, but it begs the question of what they actually thought would happen, announcing that they're doubling their price, way, way, way more expensive than Switch or PlayStation. And it's not that big a news note, but I thought it was worth mentioning just because of how bizarre it was. And it's something that I feel like gamers should be aware of, as something that might happen in the future for all systems. Price increases are coming for games and will inevitably come for the live systems that we use to play them with other people. And I just can't wrap my head around what Xbox was trying, and if they thought people would just accept it because of Game Pass. I think I know a lot of people were suggesting that maybe by making this price update, they were trying to push people into buying Game Pass instead, for a cheaper price. I actually don't know how much Game Pass costs. Let's go find out. $1. I doubt it's $1. Xbox Game Pass Ultimate. I've kind of fallen out of Game Pass or Xbox in general. They haven't really put out anything that I care about in a long, long time, sadly enough. Let's see all the plans. 14 a month, 9 a month, 9 a month. Also includes gold. So 15 times 12 is 130. So I guess that would make sense if they're like, oh, for $10 more, you can get Xbox Game Pass and play all these amazing games. And that's kind of makes sense, but overall, a boggling decision. And it was just a really weird piece of news on top of one I wanted to talk about today. And it seemed like a reasonable intro, even though I actually canceled my Xbox Live subscription this year because I don't think I've used it since playing Destiny 2 about 3 years ago. But the price is a little outrageous. I was able to get PS Plus for the first time for $30, and deals like that are out there pretty much all the time. I can't imagine paying $120, but that seems to be the direction we'll get to eventually. I'm not sure what their long term plan is. I don't know, like I said, why they did this or what sort of attention they were hoping to garner from this announcement. But the announcement is no more, and in fact, things are more free than they were before. Overall, a really strange day. But for this week's episode, there's one major thing and one smaller thing that I really want to talk about. Both announcements that came out not this past week. I think it was the week before, pertaining to some of the most iconic IPs of all time, being Star Wars and Indiana Jones, and announcements that made gamers happy for the most part. First, with Star Wars, EA is no longer the sole owner of publishing rights for Star Wars games, and gamers everywhere rejoiced because EA is the boogeyman who puts loot boxes into all of their games, and their pricing models are criminal and they're very consumer unfriendly. And I agree with a lot of that. Um, but I wanted to have a longer discussion today about whether or not the quality of Star Wars games is actually declined under EA, and whether these games that we have so much nostalgia for are actually that much better, and what are we really even looking for in a new Star Wars game, because I love Star Wars. Star Wars is probably the most definitive part of my childhood, and I owned pretty much every Star Wars game as a kid, every Star Wars Lego. It's all I cared about, and I've kind of fallen off in recent years because of how much there is, and it's so hard to keep up. And so I just wanted to talk about what do I even want from a new Star Wars games? What has EA been failing to give me because I haven't been so enthralled with the products they've been creating, and is that my fault or their fault? I don't know. But that's going to be the bulk of today's content. So if you're not into Star Wars, this one may not be for you. The other announcement being Indiana Jones, the developer who creates the Hitman games, IO, is working on a 007. No, wait, I completely switched up what I was talking about. That's completely different IP. I 007 and IO. Not talking about that today, though. It is interesting because I know Hitman 3 came out recently and is getting a lot of great reviews. But for the Indiana Jones game, is that something I care about? How are they going to differentiate themselves from Uncharted, which in my opinion has kind of mastered this Indiana Jones formula? So what could even be different? What are people looking for? We'll talk about that a little bit at the very end. But like I said, today the bulk is going to be about Star Wars, and whether or not EA succeeded, and whether or not Star Wars games were even succeeding before EA. Is Are we in such a different state now than we were when we were kids, or is that totally propped up by nostalgia? So I've kind of broken things down here in this shitty little Google sheet, um, with column A being pretty much every game that's worth talking about or that anyone brings up. This is more series than games, but things like the old Battlefront games, the old Rogue Squadron games, the Knights of the Old Republic games, iconic. The MMO attempt in the Old Republic, Force Unleashed 1 and 2, Jedi Academy and Outcasts, arguably the best lightsaber gameplay ever created. Republic Commando, people are always clamoring for a sequel to. Pod racing is almost more of an arcade game now than it is remembered as a N64 game or whichever system you played it on. The Lego games, which will never end and have been around for infinite time, but are arguably maybe the most polished and high quality of any of the Star Wars games. Bounty Hunter, which a lot of people have probably never even seen, let alone heard of, which might take the spot for like my most nostalgic Star Wars game, as weird as that is. And then a couple games based on the movie series. When looking at this list, the newer games we've got over here, the newest Squadrons game, which is pretty niche. Some people love it. It's got pretty good reviews. Fallen Order, which I haven't played, I own. Is almost Star Wars Dark Soul, is how most people describe it. But high quality, right? Good reviews. Squadron getting good reviews. The new Battlefront games are mostly demonized because of their pricing and loot box models. And there was a whole controversy with Battlefront 2 where they took out loot boxes because of customer backlash and then put them back in after launch. And then actually the MMO was published by EA, and I'm not sure everyone knows that because that was a decade ago, maybe more. I don't know anyone who plays it or if they're actually still putting out content for it, but that's not really relevant. The point is, looking at this list of games, as shitty as the pricing model may be for something like Battlefront, they're all high quality games, and that can be attributed to the developers more than EA, right? But EA at least is greenlighting quality games, and when people complain about EA, it's not usually about the games themselves so much as what they're doing to the games, the loot boxes, and I agree that all of that is awful, and nobody wants that in games nowadays. But it's so funny to me that people talk about it as if EA has ruined the Star Wars franchise, as if these games are terrible and the games of old are actually that much higher quality. But when I'm comparing these games, the new Battlefronts, the old Battlefronts, the new Battlefronts are arguably better, right? Like, I haven't played a ton of them, but when I did, the sound design, the graphics, the gameplay, the levels, the vehicles, everything was so Star Warsy. Like, it was beautiful, top notch, high quality stuff that made me feel like I was in the Star Wars world. And that's what we want from these games. But people compare them to the old games, which I know one comparison, map design, I think, is something people point to a lot for the old games as being way better. And that may be true. But gameplay can't it like, as time passes, the newer games are always going to be better gameplay wise, in my opinion. That there are obviously cases where that is not true, but the overwhelming majority of the time, as we move forward in time, gameplay only gets better as people learn from all the mistakes that have been made. And so I think Battlefront 1 and 2 old live as highly as they do due to nostalgia. And I think that's true for a lot of these games, with maybe the exception of Night of the Old Republic. Those are a little tough to revisit nowadays too. Um, so I was sitting here trying to think about how I wanted to approach this conversation. And when we talk about EA no longer being the sole publisher for Star Wars games, what are we looking for? And along with this announcement that EA is no longer the sole publisher, it was announced that Ubisoft is working on an open world Star Wars game. And that just doesn't excite me. I'm not in love with the Ubisoft open world formula. It's been done to death. Going to areas, opening up towers to open up the areas, find a million side quests. Like, I think a lot of people refer to this past generation, PS4 and Xbox One, as the open world generation, where like a ton of new IPs were made. Everything kind of had that same open world formula, and it's good. It's really well done. They've perfected it. But I'm so tired of it. And I I hear Ubisoft working on a new Star Wars open world game, and I'm like, that's not what I want out of a Star Wars game. It's hard to figure out what I want out of a Star Wars game because, like I said, the new games are high quality, and I haven't played Fallen Order, and I'm curious to see if it satisfies the itch that I have. But when I'm reflecting on my childhood and loving these Star Wars games, I try to figure out what it was exactly that made it feel Star Warsy and feel fun to play. And so I want to highlight the game. Well, first I want to talk about the games that I would rank as like my top 5 from nostalgia. And I have to admit now, I haven't played the Knights of the Old Republic games, and I know that they're a little tough to revisit now. I should still do it. But for that, I'm going to put them on my list just because of how highly regarded they are. And I think it needs to make anyone's list of top Star Wars games just because of what it did story-wise and world-wise. And that's what I want. Ironically, that's what I'm looking for in a Star Wars game. So I was briefly looking at Metacritic just to get a feel for which games are actually well reviewed, because overall Star Wars games are like, not outside of the KOTOR series, Knights of the Old Republic, they're not like knocking it out of the park now or back in our childhood. So to me, that says people love Star Wars, and growing up, Star Wars was molding us. And so any sort of Star Wars game we could get our hands on automatically became good. And that's not to say there aren't good things about those games, but I think they're regarded a little more highly than they are actually good. But yeah, we'll get into that. So by reviews, Knights of the Republic knocks everything out. Like, I think it's the only one that even touched the 90s. The first one in particular. The second one had good reviews, but not quite as good. Old Republic, weirdly, has like an 85 on Metacritic, and I enjoyed my time with that game. I didn't play that much. But I don't think most people know that this game was actually pretty well received for all its flaws. Academy and Outcast. This is the Jedi. I forget the exact Jedi Knight, Jedi Academy, and Jedi Knight, Jedi Outcast were 2 games in a series that really focused heavily on the lightsaber mechanics and being a Jedi, and they got pretty good scores. They were like in the low 80s, I think. Battlefront old, similar, hanging out in that low 80s. I think Battlefront 2 on some platforms may have been high 70s. The old Rogue Squadron games, I didn't play them. Driving the ships wasn't exactly, that wasn't what I craved from the Star Wars games. But I think that one of them made it as high as an 85. That's pretty impressive. And the Lego series are just like routinely well received, and I think they've got their formula down to a T, and they're a little on the lighter side and know exactly what they're doing and exactly who their audience is. And I wanted to give them credit because they're pretty much always uh, doing their thing and making people laugh, and I appreciate that even if I don't play them. So my top five doesn't include any of the newer games, which kind of goes contrast to the point I'm trying to make, which is that they're actually good and people lean on nostalgia a little too heavily to remember the days of yore. But I guess this is going to be in no particular order because I'm basing pretty much all of this on nostalgia. I haven't played any of these games since early days of high school. I'm 29 now. That's a long freaking time ago. Like I said, I'm putting the KOTOR series in just purely out of respect for what it is and what it's done for Star Wars games, and because I think it's, at least a lot of aspects of it are what I'm looking for in a new Star Wars game that hasn't been met yet. Like I said, I haven't played Fallen Order. Maybe it satisfies the itch I'm looking for. But first, we have Bounty Hunter. Like I said, no one has really heard about this game or played this game or ever talks about this game. I played it on GameCube, and it kind of dives into what I'm more interested. It's the reason Mandalorian is popular right now, and that it is letting you experience the Star Wars universe outside of a Skywalker, which people are done with Skywalkers right now, especially after the sequel movies. And it was, I mean, everyone regards Boba Fett as one of the coolest characters of all time, even though we didn't know like anything about him. And obviously Mando is expanding on all of that. But as a kid, playing as this badass bounty hunter who is the most badass guy in the movies, even though we know nothing about him, was exactly what I was looking for. I don't think I ever beat the game. I don't even know if the game was good, but it's weirdly like I remember the levels more detail. Like everyone experiences this where we have these weirdly specific memories from things from our childhood, and I have no idea what causes certain things to stick in our head like they do. But Bounty Hunter is one of the games where I can like picture elements of it vividly, even though I never beat it, and it's not one of those games that I have like memorized. But it really impacted my love of video games and was important for developing what I cared about in gaming and who I am now. As weird as that sounds for a game that I never beat and am having a difficult time describing. I remember getting stuck on one level where I was like outside of a building trying to find my way back in, and I'm pretty sure that's how I stopped. I don't think I ever went back to the game, and it comes back to what I'm talking about, this love of, and maybe this isn't the case for everyone, but at least for me, these Star Wars games that everyone love, a lot of it is vague memories and feelings rather than specific criteria that these games nailed as to why we love them. Which gets me into my second on the list, and this lines up with the top 5 reviews. The Academy Outcast, the Jedi Knight series, really nailed the being a Jedi feeling. And I spent countless hours playing local multiplayer with my brother and running around and murdering AIs and each other. And nothing else really accomplished that. And nothing else has like, even the Battlefront games, when you are able to be a Jedi, it's more about being overpowered and feeling stronger than everyone else in the game. Whereas Academy and Outcast focused on like actual challenging duels as a Jedi and or Sith, and that was really novel and is still really novel. And I think that's part of what people crave. I think Academy Outcast, the Jedi Knight series, is something people frequently point to as what they're looking for in a new game. I'm not sure it's. I mean, I would play one. I think these third-person action games were way more popular when we were growing up in the 90s and early 2000s than they are now. Um, it seems like Dark Souls esque games, which Fallen Order move towards, is kind of the lane you have to get into if you want to do that sort of thing. But like, imagine if there was like a gritty, realistic Star Wars game made by Naughty Dog or something. Like, when I'm trying to figure out what I want, it's something more like that. Like, I don't want the open world stuff. Like, as far as I'm concerned, Ghost of Tsushima is basically a Star Wars game, right? Or at least basically a Jedi Knight game, or a force sensitive person game, right? Like, imagine Jin was instead just someone who was force sensitive, and throughout the game, you made light side or dark side choices rather than whether you wanted to be the ghost or a honorable samurai. That's basically Star Wars, right? I think Jedi get compared to samurai like pretty frequently, and if you just coat Ghost of Tsushima and Star Wars paint, that's basically what I'm imagining for this Ubisoft open world game, and that's cool. People love Ghost of Tsushima. People would love a Star Wars version of Ghost of Tsushima, but that's not what I'm looking for, and I think that's not what a lot of people are looking for, and that kind of falls into the same trap that these newer EA games fall into, which is leaning on something safe and just putting Star Wars paint on it. And so something more similar to a linear esque game that focuses on story and environment. And I was thinking about this last night. Something like the new God of War, where maybe you're a bounty hunter or something, and you move from slightly linear world to slightly linear world in your ship, and you upgrade your gear, even though I didn't love the gear upgrade system in God of War, and you learn new moves. That sort of thing appeals to me more than the open world game. But anyways, I'm getting off topic. Let's go to my next game. Another one that went very under the radar for most people. The movie based Revenge of the Sith game. Another third person action game that was just really fun. And this is going to be similar to Bounty Hunter in that my memories of it are vague. And the only memory I like really remember is getting my ass handed to me on Mustafar over and over and over again. I feel like I can't remember which way it was, but you either play the majority of the game as Anakin, and at the end they make you play as Obi-Wan so that you're not the evil person, or vice versa. And I'm pretty sure I just getting my ass handed to me by Anakin over and over and over and over again. And in spite of that, I still remember this game so fondly. I got it from Costco. It was kind of like finding a gem in a bargain bin. And I think I had like one friend in college who also remembered this game fondly or at all. And that's kind of the funny thing about these these older Star Wars games outside of Knights of the Old Republic and Battlefront is that not everyone played every Star Wars game because people were just trying random things and seeing what worked. No one's really figured out exactly what we're looking for in a Star Wars game, and there's a lot of different angles to take, and I'm not sure which one's right. And I think the most positive thing that could come out of EA not being the solo publisher anymore is that lots of different companies could take cracks at it. And game quality is so high nowadays, like I said, even the EA games, that we're likely to get a lot of good games and at least one really great game. And so we'll just have to wait and see. But moving on to my next game, or my last game, because we're already at 4, Republic Commando. The other game people frequently clamor for a sequel to. I was watching some gameplay for it today just to get a feel for to make sure my memories of it are accurate. And it almost has like a similar UI to the GameCube Metroid games, but it also had some controlling of your squad and just took an angle that no one had taken yet. And I think now that the Clone Wars series is more mainstream, people are a lot more interested in them as anything other than a generic AI. And I think now would be a really good time to make a sequel. Um, First person shooter games are in a weird place right now. You've got a couple that are trying riskier things in the Wolfenstein, Doom, Metro areas of things, but I haven't played a first person shooter in a long time. Titanfall, I guess. Titanfall 2. They could respawn, like, if we made it so that clone troopers were a little more badass than they are in the movies, something more akin to the Titan runners from Titanfall. That's not a bad pairing in my mind. Yeah, I don't. I mean, because there's kind of like Titans or robots in the Republic Army as well. That's interesting to think about. What I was gonna say is I haven't played a ton of first-person shooter games nowadays, and they're more focused on the battle royale style of things. But I just don't want a game that already exists with Star Wars paint on it, and I that seems obvious to say, but I think that's what we're gonna get for a little while, especially from Ubisoft. I'll be curious what stories they go to. I do think the Old Republic is a deep basin of ideas for people to work from. And I know people were excited for Star Wars 1313, which got canceled a while ago. But there's just so much to work from. And there are so many stories being told by Disney now, too. We're moving from Mando into the Obi-Wan series and an Ahsoka series and the Squadron series. And I am over inundated with it. There's too much. There's a reason I'm not as passionate about Star Wars now as I was the midnight premiere of The Force Awakens, when I had that kid like feeling like I did when I was growing up. I haven't felt that since that night, just because they kind of fucked up the sequel trilogy, but even Mandalorian hasn't really got me feeling that same way. As I haven't finished season 2. I read a lot of people said season 2 made them feel that way, so maybe I just need to dive back in. But I'm just tired of it right now, and that is a fear that comes with there being multiple publishers, is that if too many people are taking cracks at it, and too many of those games are generic and things we've seen before and are just Star Wars paint on top of games we've played, might do more harm than good. And EA wasn't producing bad games. They were producing quality games with some anti-consumer friendly models mixed in, but that's not what, like, if the game was good enough, I would play it in spite of those, and I didn't, because maybe I've grown up too much. I don't think so. I think I still love Star Wars as much as I did growing up, but I think it's also because there are just so many amazing IPs and game series out right now that just being Star Wars isn't good enough. You have to be doing something new and unique, and not just taking a formula that someone has mastered and making it Star Wars so everyone will buy it. And they will. And they will buy it, and it will get fine reviews, and it will be a well-made game. But that's just not good enough for me. I don't think it'll be good enough for a lot of people. But just looking at all of these games in front of me, the newer games are arguably better. And a lot of these old games, KOTOR notwithstanding, because I think it deserves the praise it has gotten and is not just purely based on nostalgia. I think a lot of the older games are purely nostalgia. And come from a different time of gaming where we didn't expect as much from games and we were entertained by simpler things. And just the idea of handling a character with a lightsaber was so novel and unique. It didn't really matter what else was going on in the game. And that doesn't work anymore. So it is arguably harder to make a more impactful Star Wars game now than it was, even if the games were worse when they were coming out. So that's kind of my take on EA no longer being the solo publisher and what I want, where I'm expecting Star Wars to go. And frankly, I kind of have similar opinions on the Indiana Jones game. I know I don't love Indiana Jones. I have no real connection to it. I've seen them. They're whatever. They're what they don't do it for me. Um, for me, Uncharted is better, and I don't know what an Indiana Jones game could do that an Uncharted game hasn't done. I think some people want an Indiana Jones game to be less actiony because the Uncharted games are pretty over the top, and Naughty Dog kind of introduced the spectacle moment into video games where you feel like you're living in an action movie. And you could pull that out of an Indiana Jones game, but what are you left with? Because Indiana Jones is basically Nathan Drake, right? A quippy searching for an ancient relic. There are bad guys, oftentimes Nazis with guns. And the gameplay of Uncharted is good, but the games are excellent because of the characters and because of the insane cinematic moments. And I'll be really curious to see what they try with this Indiana Jones game. I haven't played a ton of Tomb Raider games. I'm pretty sure they fall into the Uncharted category of puzzles and shooting and cinematic moments. I know the deaths are ridiculously violent, but that's pretty much the only thing that makes the news about those games. So there's not a ton of free real estate that I can see for these Indiana Jones games to move in onto. I'll be curious to see if they innovate in any way that I am not seeing, but it'll depend largely on the story. I think I'll be curious to see if they pull in Harrison Ford in any capacity to play like old grizzled Indiana, but I doubt it. They'll probably want to start fresh, similar to the Uncharted movies using Tom Holland instead of Nathan Fillion, which is a horrible mistake. But yeah, it was just funny those two announcements came out at the same time since they're so nostalgic and not actually that relevant now. I mean, Star Wars is fucking relevant now. Don't get me wrong. It's almost too relevant. It's almost overstaying its welcome for me, and it's not working quite as well as the Marvel Universe thing. I think maybe that's unfair, but I don't need as much as we're being given. Let's put it that way. Same with Indiana Jones. I mean, we're gonna get a new movie, I think, question mark. But yeah, we'll just have to wait and see and see what gameplay comes out and see if they're actually fun. Have there ever been Indiana Jones games? Indiana Jones game. Yes. Lego, obviously. I bet the Lego game is great. I'm not going to dig into these too much. I imagine there's some whip slinging, and there's some puzzle solving, there's some treasure finding. Uncharted. Will it be better than Uncharted? I doubt it. But will it make the people who like Indiana Jones happy? Also, I doubt it. Anyways, I think that's all I wanted to talk about today. There's not too much crazy stuff going on in the game world right now. A couple of the game companies that I follow, like Kind of Funny Games, have been really vamping up their social media presence these days, which doesn't do it for me. But it's interesting to see how much content's being pumped out right now. I know the game reviewer Skill Up recently announced that he's doing a weekly podcast based on news, and his first topics were, I think, Cyberpunk, Indiana Jones, and Star Wars. So, maybe we'll merge because I'm the same level as him. But next week, which will be the last pod for January, I'm going to do a recap of the games I've beaten this month and the games I've been playing. So far, I've beaten Night in the Woods, amazing. Star Wars Miles Morales, amazing. Senua, or no, Hellblade, Senua's Sacrifice is actually the game Peter and I will be doing our next review on. I beat that about a week ago, and that game was amazing. I'd never heard of it. I don't think many people have, but that'll be a fun review. I'm looking forward to it. We were supposed to be playing Mega Man Battle Network and Golden Sun, but I got scammed out of my money trying to buy Golden Sun in the sequel. So working on getting that money back and then getting that game. We're still planning to do that, but it might not be till February considering how long Golden Sun is. So yeah, next week we'll talk about all those games. I'll give some mini reviews on them. I may not go too deep into Hellblade just because Peter and I will be doing the full pod on it. But I figured each month the last episode I do can be a recap. And I've got a lot of thoughts on Night in the Woods and Miles Morales, so it should occupy plenty of time. Plus, I'm playing Spiritfarer right now on the Switch, and I've got some takes on that one. It hasn't grabbed me quite as much as I was hoping it would. So anyway, yeah, that's been my thoughts on Star Wars, where it's been, where it's going, where it is currently. I hope y'all enjoyed, and I look forward to next week to talk about what I've been playing. So thanks so much, and talk to you next time.